Hey boys and girls, how y'all doing? This is Ted, this is Ride with Ted, and here I am sitting on my bike. See? That's all I can do, is just sit on my bike. And sorry about the glare, but this is it. This is about as good as it gets, man. So as you can see, the arm is in a cast thing here. Splint's coming off on Tuesday, but it's another 3 to 4 weeks before I can actually use it, because like as you can see, I can barely reach the bars. So yeah, I'm not going to be riding it anytime soon. But in lieu of that, I thought what I'd give you guys is some video of the trip that's highlighted in my book. So what you're going to get is a 15 minute read of one of the chapters, chapter 13 I believe, and you're going to get to hear all about some of my fun exploits on the trip. So that's it, kids. Hope you enjoyed the video and the read of chapter 13 of The Road Most Traveled, a motorcycle ride along the east coast of America. And by the way, if you haven't already known, the audiobook is done. It's now available on audio on audible.com, and of course the paperback is available and ebook. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below, and of course subscribe, and I will always respond to your comments. And that's all for now. So see if I can do this. Just peace out and rock and roll. Enjoy, kids. Bye.
Chapter 13. The Clown Car. Imperfection is beauty. Badness is genius. And it's better to be absolutely ridiculous than absolutely boring. Marilyn Monroe. At this point, I had already been on the road for 7.5 hours, and I still had another projected 4.5 hours to go. The sun was setting fast, and it was now where it was shining through the tall pine trees that lined the side of the road. This created a shadowed path for me to ride down, with the added pleasure of the strobe light effect of the trees blocking the sun's rays. I turned my head slightly to the left to lessen the effect, as I'm sure it was wreaking havoc with the pupils of my eyes. Despite being on a motorcycle, riding at 75 miles per hour, and having a lot of wind noise to deal with, I still managed to hear this high-pitched, buzzing noise that bore the similarity of an RC model plane. I caught a glimpse of the offending noise in my left mirror, and within a couple of seconds, a small Honda Civic that lacked any factory paint slowly passed by me in the left lane. Behind its black-tinted windows, and despite the wind noise and horrific wheezing coming from the exhaust pipe, I could hear the ominous thumping of bass emanating from the dark capsule, where the occupants were likely going deaf while trying to drown out the exhaust screams of the tiny 4-cylinder engine. To add to this imagery, the entirety of its primed bodywork, including the large flared fenders and ground effects that had other primer colors, bright green and red, aside from the flat gray, was entirely overshadowed by the massive aftermarket rear spoiler that sat high above the rear deck of the car's small trunk. This ridiculous contraption was just as wide as the vehicle and sat at least 30 inches high atop a trellis work of metal framing. The spoiler's side wings added to the silliness of the whole thing and further confirmed that it belonged on a vehicle twice its size. To accompany this buffoonery, the wheels of the vehicle flared out. They had what is called negative camber, an excessive negative camber at that, and the vehicle was also slammed as well, that being lowered significantly so that there was little clearance between the bottom of the small car and the ground. All this together with the very large exhaust pipe sticking out in the back, and what you have is something akin to a cartoon car and the noise to accompany it. The only thing I think could have possibly rounded out this ridiculous ensemble would have to be a dozen or so clowns emerging from it at the next fuel stop. Come to think of it, I should have signaled to the driver to toot his clown horn for confirmation. The comic relief of my ride so far gently pulled away, and I wondered how the primer clown car managed at the 80+ miles per hour it was traveling. I recall hearing it for some time as its exhaust note lingered and eventually faded away. It left me reminded of the annoying sound of gas-powered leaf blowers that would disturb my Saturday afternoons back home during the summer months. Landscapers hired by neighbors would fire up two of these insidious machines as their operators would lazily wander around the front yard, blowing every stray blade of loose grass into the street for up to 45 minutes. At 80 to 90 decibels, their noise breaches the peace with hearing damage consistency until the operator is convinced that no stray fiber of unwanted nature exists on their client's lawn. Meanwhile, motorcyclists globally get their balls busted because they ride by on their Harleys with loud pipes through a quiet neighborhood for a span of 15 seconds. Or a rider revs his sport bike engine at a traffic light, waking some infant asleep in the car in the next lane. I often wondered if we all sounded like leaf blowers, if the complainers would mind as much. The mileage to my next gas stop ticked away quickly, and with the clown car out of sight and just north of Stony Creek, Virginia, a series of blue signs appeared on the side of the highway. The first one called out for fast food establishments at the next exit that included a Wendy's and a Popeyes. The next blue sign showed lodging with the logos of Hampton Inn, Sleep Inn, and Fairfield Inn. Then came the blue sign that showed fuel available at the exit with the logos of two stations, Mobil and Exxon, both of which I would not ordinarily use because of their high prices and lack of non-ethanol fuels, but there is little other choice. Beggars can't be choosers, as they say. I took the exit, and looming before me was this large plaza of closely placed structures, the first of which was the Exxon station and its 4 rows of 16 pumps under a giant canopy that was attached to a convenience store. Gas, bathroom, and food. They knew what they were doing. I pulled up to the pump and filled the tank. To my surprise, the bike used just over 2 gallons of fuel on this leg. If this were going to be the norm for the trip, I'd be in good shape. After filling the bike, I pulled up to the convenience store part of the plaza and parked the bike on the far end away from other travelers who, for the most part, looked disheveled, out of place, and in a hurry. Let's keep away from these other weary travelers. As part of my routine, I took my phone off the mount, covered the GPS with my gloves, locked my helmet to the bike, removed the camera and comm unit before going inside. It seems like a lot to do, but the whole process takes less than a minute to accomplish, so it's little time lost. Satisfied that I did all I needed to do, I went inside and meandered past the dozen or so people waiting in line for food or to pay for whatever they were clutching in their arms. The convenience store was surprisingly busy for that time of day, late Friday evening. In the men's room, I took care of business and I was washing my hands. I looked at my tired face in the mirror. Thanks to traffic and fuel stops, I had been on the road for nearly 9 hours already and was looking every bit of it. Not that I was dirty or disheveled, but my eyes looked fatigued, and those areas exposed to the sunlight shining through my visor had a dull red glow to them. I splashed some water on my face a few times, and the last time I held the water in my cupped hands over my face and nose. That felt good. I dried myself off and meandered back into the open area of the store, grabbed a 20-ounce bottle of Coke and one of those Drake's apple pies in the green and white package. Pre-dinner, I called it. I wasn't really hungry now. That sensation wore off a while ago. As I was paying for my goods, the heavy-set man behind the counter made a quick glance out of the windows. "How's the ride?" he asked as he looked back at me. Aside from my appearance, he likely saw the Heritage parked up near the building. Not too bad. It's getting kind of chilly, though. That thought really hadn't dawned on me until that moment. Ride safe and stay warm as you can, he said. I put my debit card back in my wallet and grabbed my goods. Thanks. I'll do my best. As I walked outside, the autumn chill reminded me of what time of year it was and that I might be slightly underdressed for the occasion. I shrugged it off and opened the Coke as I walked to the bike that I parked at the far left parking space at the front end of the building. The Coke felt good going down my throat and a slight jolt of energy creeped into me. It was then that I had one of those WTF moments. I saw something hanging from the bottom of the bike just behind the front wheel, but from the frame. My heart sank. I sped up my pace and got closer to the bike, and that's when I saw that the voltage regulator had come loose and was hanging by its wire from the bottom of the frame. Harley Davidson decided that the best place for this crucial piece of equipment would be to mount it to the front of the frame in front at the lowest point, secured by two 1.5-inch long cap nuts. Only in my case, these nuts were completely gone. As I assessed the situation, I could see that the regulator had scraped the ground a few times as some of the fins on the front of the unit were worn down a little and the silver aluminum of its case was exposed from its otherwise black casing. I wondered aloud how in the hell those nuts, if torqued correctly, would ever come loose and fall out. It seemed, if anything, impossible. I stopped worrying about the cause and focused on the solution, which was how was I going to secure it back on the bike. The only logical solution. I went back into the convenience store and made my way to the road necessities that truckers may need in a pinch and found the one thing I knew would do the trick: zip ties. I bought a package and back at the bike I fed 2 of the ties through the now vacant bolt holes, around the frame and back to itself. With confidence-inducing zip, the 2 zip ties were now solely responsible for holding this thing on the bike for the duration of the trip. I manhandled the regulator several times to satisfy myself that it wasn't going anywhere and gave myself a congratulatory pat on the back for managing the roadside fix. Way back deep in the recesses of my mind, I wondered if the zip ties would hold out until I got back home 10 days from now, or would I have to find a Harley shop along the way to replace my temporary fix. Deeper into devil's advocate what-if mind, I wondered what I would have done if I was in the middle of nowhere and I found myself with a dangling regulator and no convenience store zip ties at my disposal. I ran through the inventory of what I had with me on the bike and reassured myself that the roll of duct tape, roll of electrical tape, several bungee cords, and at least 2 very long bootlaces would do their very best to keep the regulator from cartwheeling down the interstate. To add to this list, I now had 48 additional 9-inch zip ties to keep it all together. Satisfied that I wouldn't be stranded at a convenience store near 2 gas stations, 2 hotels, and 2 fast food places, I reconsidered my situation not a dire one and refocused my attention on drinking my Coke and eating my apple pie. Damn you, cap nuts. Damn you all to hell. While eating my snack, I realized it was actually what most of us would refer to as dinner time. Faced with the knowledge that I still had at least 4 or 5 hours of riding time left, I pondered the idea of going to one of the 2 available fast food places available to me at that moment, both of which were within walking distance. Neither of the 2 places appealed to me, no offense to Wendy's or Popeyes, but the idea of woofing down a hamburger, fries, and a cold drink inside the stark, uninviting interior of an institutionally appointed fast food joint was no better than woofing down an apple pie and Coke outside a gas station convenience store and offered about as much nutritional and energy value. I took the last bite of my apple pie and muttered, "Oh well," to myself. I took my now empty Discovery Cove water bottle out of the handlebar mount and stuffed it in my left side saddlebag and replaced it with my unfinished Coke. It was smaller than the big water bottle, and there was enough room for it to bounce around a little in the handlebar mounted cup holder. As I put back on my helmet and got myself ready to ride off, I wondered if the bottle would stay put at 70 plus miles per hour on the interstate, or would it launch itself into the path of some unsuspecting driver behind me in an explosion of brown carbonated paint-eating liquid. I smiled to myself at the thought of the look on that driver's face when the imaginary flight of this 20-ounce bottle would slam into the front of their car and instantly releasing its contents. Thankfully, it wouldn't happen.